I'm going to run through a presentation which was originally going to be delivered by Charmaine. She's not here, of course. So you have to forgive me. I saw these slides for the very first time this morning. I'm going to whiz through it, but just before I do, I've learned 2 new words today. One is fragilism. I've not come across that before. And fragilization. Thank you for that. And the other is a word that I learned before the last speaker actually sat down. That was called the impact of spreadsheet. So thank you for both of those. If we're going to make a difference, then we actually have to put together an organization that makes a difference. One of the things that struck me, one of the reasons I'm here, is the potential of a change in the paradigm that we use to govern organizations. Wouldn't it be absolutely wonderful if in 3 years' time you're standing over the coffee machine and talking to one of your colleagues and say, I was there when this started. Now, I was actually there when Twitter started. I spoke to the guy who developed Twitter, and I remember walking away thinking, what a bloody load of nonsense that is. Yeah. So, but I was there. However,
did you tweet that?
No, I didn't tweet that. I could not now go near Twitter for that reason. So, time to wake up, think differently. We're going to need to put some weight behind this, to put some sort of a machine behind to do this, and we need to think about why we exist, and it's about this, isn't it? We've heard speakers talk about, we got into, and very soon Tony's going to stand up and take us through to lunchtime and really get into some of the practicalities. But we need a force rather than an engine, I guess, in order to make this happen, because we're going to have to make this go. So, Tony established this last year. What we want to do is to bring the right sort of people together. You are in great company today because we could be the kernel of something that is really important. And we need to think about how we act as evangelists to bring this idea. So we need to steer our direction and do these sorts of things. So we set up an advisory committee. Now, it almost sounds like a fragile process at the start. We've got a committee, yeah? But we need to actually get something going. So, few people together. We're going to have some associates within this, because what we're trying to do is to set up a force to make it happen. So, an anti-fragility academy. We need to start spreading the word. We need to start making people think in a different way. So an academy to offer evaluation, consultation, advice to organizations. We want to do all of these things: networking, training events, consultancy, assessment, because we need to get out there and evangelize. We need to get out there and make it work. Otherwise, it's just going to be an interesting read, and we need to make those things actually go and happen. Couple of events that are worth mentioning now. A new seminar coming in London on the 14th of May, and then an anti-fragility directors group, invitation only, coming up on the 3rd of June, again in central London. What's really important, what I want to get across, is the idea that we need to be organized and we need to be evangelistic in getting this done. Even as everyone has stood up, even as the questions have been asked, I don't know about you, but another layer in my sort of thinking has just turned over again today. This is a really fascinating subject. This has the potential to be transformational in a way that no other subject has been. And that's why I think this is really, really an important thing. So I apologize for whizzing through this and not giving this the energy it deserved, but I'd rather you actually listen now to Tony and get into the practicalities of how we take such an interesting and difficult to grasp concept and make it work in the real world. So, time to think, and as I say, Wouldn't it be great to be sitting with your children in a few years' time and saying, I was actually there in that room when this whole thing took off? Just like Twitter. Thank you. Tony.
Thank you, Gary. This time I need to remember it to have it.
I've left it switched on.
You've left it switched on. That's a very good move from me. Whoops. Oh, we'll skip next. Thank you. Whoops. That way round, I think. Oops, no, it's going to have to be that way round because I can't find the wire. That way round. Right, guys. Now, can I say that I think a lot of the ideas have already begun to come out. So what I'm going to do is, these slides will look horrendous. Do not try and follow them in detail, etc., because I'm still developing the material, etc., and there's too much of it. But I did want to give you some sort of some coverage in this process about what it's really all about and sort of happening in terms of my thinking and where I see the potentials for R and all the sorts of stuff which go with that. So my starting point then is Taleb told us that anti-fragility is important. He told us basically what it was, but he didn't really tell us how to apply it and in all the different features of an organisation. And from the discussion already, I think it's fairly obvious that this is more far-reaching than really anything I've seen before. If you look at improvement methods or approaches, they tend to be about people, or they tend to be about culture, they tend to be about process, they tend to be about strategy, but they don't really bring it all together. We had a period when we talked about total quality management, and it was supposed to do all that, but it wasn't very coherent, and it meant different things to different people, okay? So we need to work out how to do it in practice, and I'm going to try and talk a bit about that. I'm also going to try and talk about what I think are the common pitfalls of fragile organisations, which I think Michael's given a really good introduction to, and my personal views in relation to that, and some think about all these different aspects of the organisation, the strategy, the governance, the process, the people, the technology, the systems, the supply chain, and indeed the product and market characteristics. And we've touched on most of those already, interestingly enough, in the discussion. We've already had supply chain raised. We've already had issues about technology raised. Okay, so it's quite interesting how that's really coming through. So I'll attempt to do all of that sort of stuff. So the book's objectives, just to say, because I'm talking quite a lot about the book now, is to familiarise executive managers, entrepreneurs and students with the concepts of applicability and the use of the concept of anti-fragility in both designing and optimising and managing organisations of all types in all sectors. It's also about connecting it and contrasting it with conventional thinking. What's different in the paradigm and how does it fit with what we're doing already? It's to help develop understanding of the mechanisms whereby fragility is embedded within the organisation in terms of its strategy, governance, structures, people, relationships, culture, etc. And also the products and things and the technology. And to enable people to take stock of the fragility of their own organisations and begin to think about action plans to make them a bit more anti-fragile. That's the plan. That's what the book's about, right? Now I'll try and touch on lots of aspects about that as we go through. Now this is the content from the book. You can see it's got proof across it. This is from actually the proofs. The book is in the proof stage. It's about to have the index put together on it at the moment. I think it's worth just mentioning how it works. Basically, this is a picture of an organisation. There's the general introduction, the developing an anti-fragile organisation, which actually looks not just at the concept of anti-fragility in organisations, but connects it to the standard methods we've got in use at the moment. We've already had the excellence model mentioned, for example, in ISO 9000. And I think very important, and we've touched on the edge of it, is systems thinking. And I'll touch on that one some more. There's a chapter about governance, strategy and risk, which deals with some of the risk ideas I mentioned before, but also the whole problems about governance, which we've touched on. And the strategy, we haven't said much about strategy. This has been a big change period for organisational strategies. We've moved much more into emergent thinking in terms of strategy. Strategy isn't fixed, it isn't written in stone, it's constantly changing, and there's quite a lot of issues about that. And then we've got the people and culture, developing anti-fragile people. That's quite a nice one, isn't it? And a culture of anti-fragility. We've talked about culture issues already. Processes and operations is chapter 4. That's a big chapter. We've already seen a bit about the fragility of some lean approaches in particular. Now, I think there's a big problem. I think there's fragile lean and anti-fragile lean. And I want to talk about that. And then we've got a bit about the supply. Also, we've got technology, information and technology. Information is crucial to anti-fragility, but also technology. And as I mentioned before, in my opinion, every technology is fragile. Even when it's a solution, ultimately it will become a problem. It's in the nature of technology. Okay, so the car was a solution, but ultimately becomes a problem. Okay. And the impact of innovation. And then we've got supply chain, environment and corporate social responsibility. We've got markets, products and services. And the last chapter deals with you, to some extent, the individual. I had one or two conversations this morning which went with this. It also includes my view about people's fragility in their roles, which maybe gets a bit too close to home, but it's got a lot of stuff about research areas and various other things as well. So that's the structure, and I'm going to try and touch on little bits of all of those in the discussion. Now, what you can see is that talking about an anti-fragile organisation is really dealing with all aspects of it, from its culture and its governance and its strategy and its risks and its processes and its people and its technology and its use of information and its supply chain and its attitude to the world. It's really covering all aspects of the organisation in terms of what it does. Now, I'd like to start by just going back to this issue about the fact that we've been optimising the wrong thing. Okay, I want to be quite clear about this. We maximise efficiency, we minimise cost, we maximise throughput, we maximise usage. We might use the FQM excellence model or the Malcolm Baldrige equivalent or the Deming Prize model. I would suggest that all of these things, using any of these criteria, are partly missing the point. What we should be doing is saying, look, we've got an organisation here which is doing a job, it's got an important job to do, it's serving a market, it might be making money as part of one stakeholders' requirements, or it might be a public sector organisation or a voluntary sector for the public good. It's there for a purpose. That purpose should lead to it continuing doing that and getting better at doing that. What we should be doing, I suggest, is maximise its anti-fragility, and maybe we need some side constraint. There needs to be a minimum efficiency, minimum profitability even, in relation to this organisation, but we shouldn't be maximising profit, which leads us to the wrong behaviours. We shouldn't be maximising efficiency, which gives us the wrong answer. We should be maximising anti-fragility. That would be my hypothesis, if you like, for the future in any organisation. Now, can you think of an organisation not like that? Well, yes, a project-based organisation that exists for a short period for one purpose. Okay? You don't want it to survive forever. It's got a finite life. Okay, so, okay, what can we say? It's turn of the millennium, you know, we had this idea of we needed an organisation to take us through the transition of all the threats that we were facing at that period, and that would be a finite life project-based organisation. We'd like it to be done well through its period, we'd like it to survive through its period, but then we want to close it. Right? That's what I'm excluding. Now, Taleb talks a lot about that as efficiency goes up, fragility goes up. But I want to put the other end into this as well. I think that when you've got a very inefficient system or a very inefficient organisation, it also tends to be fragile. So I think we've got a U-shaped relationship here between fragility and efficiency. And I think that in the middle of this, we've got some relatively flat area because of that. And this is our useful, if you like, efficiency range. And I think we shouldn't go outside that efficiency range. That seem a reasonable hypothesis? You see, the quest to keep pushing on this is very, very strong in our businesses because of the profit maximisation criteria. And it's at a big price. Okay, because the more we push into the efficiency, the more we tend to hardwire, the more we tend to centralise facilities and centralise information, and the more damage potentially we face when we actually get towards that boundary. So I think it's very important what the speed of this is going up on, but I think we should look at that. Remember, this is multidimensional. This is not a unidimensional picture in reality. Okay? This is one of the problems about fragility and anti-fragility is the number of dimensions involved in it is enormous as such. There's lots of ways we can talk about process efficiency, not one measure, and we've got lots of processes in the organisation. So I just want to draw attention to that as a starting point. Now, in the first chapter of the book, actually, I do look at some of the existing models we have for working in organisations. ISO 9001, which is the quality management system model, based on a rather nice circle model about quality improvement and stuff. The excellence model, like the EFQM excellence model, which is the big one in Europe, with which I am a licensed trainer for all the courses, in fact. Anyone interested? There we go. The American equivalent, Malcolm Baldridge, the Japanese equivalent, the Denman Prize model. In the business schools, we have other models. The McKinsey 7S model is one which sort of looks at the linkages between all the key characteristics of the organisation. The Deloitte layer model is shown over here, and the Deloitte layer model is quite interesting because in some senses, it's because I had to teach Deloitte's consultants the model for Deloitte. It was a rather strange job I got at one stage. I got quite keen on the model because it does deal with the sort of the levels which actually correspond to my chapters to some extent, where we start at the easy to change things about the customers and the channels and the services and products, and we drop down to the hard to change things like the infrastructure, the technology and the assets. Okay, and it's quite a nice model for that. This is the EFQM excellence model in the current form. 9 criteria made up of enablers, the good things you do, and results, the good things you achieve, covering all the stakeholders in the organisation and how you lead them and how you deploy the strategy and manage your people and so on, and your resources and your processes, and then what you achieve in terms of customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction, good corporate citizenship and business performance. And it's got a feedback loop. You look at what you've got compared to your benchmarks and what you aimed for, and you go back and change things using learning and creativity. Now, I think it should be said that a model like this, or indeed the ISO 9001 model as expressed in the process model as it's called, are anti-fragile. Okay? This is a learning model. We do things, we achieve results, we learn from them, we use innovation to change them. That's anti-fragile. But maybe there's stuff missing in there too, and I want to come to that. Okay? Now, the one which I haven't said anything about is soft systems thinking. Soft systems thinking is really quite an interesting idea, and it was a big change historically. World War II, a lot of mathematicians, statisticians and engineers began to be used in logistics and military logistics for the first time, dealing with things like replacement of equipment and supply networks and optimising them. But in the 70s, it was realised that the methods these guys who had produced, which were very good and had been taken on by industry after the war and became the basis of what we now call operational research, didn't work when you couldn't agree what you were optimising. And that any human system involving people, we couldn't agree by and large because the stakeholders wouldn't agree on what we were optimising. Okay, we all saw it differently from our own perspective. We had a different view, a different hold-on in terms of it. And so soft system thinking developed as a methodology for dealing with problems where we couldn't agree on what we were trying to optimise, but we agree we had a problem. Okay? And a lot of the problems you guys face are exactly of that nature these days. Different stakeholders see the problem from a different perspective and would say it slightly differently in terms of what we're trying to work on. All of these actually contribute to, are related to, I would suggest, the whole anti-fragility debate, but they're all partial pictures as such. Okay? So if you want a really crude little test for anti-fragility, think about the following. How good are your current approaches to managing the organisation on a, let's say, a 0 to 10 scale, 10 being good? Okay? Do we include deliberate diversity of approach and deployment on a 0 to 10, 10 being yes? How aware are we as an organisation of our environment? 0 to 10, 10 being very. Do we learn as an organisation? 0 to 10. Do we implement what we learn? Do we learn fast? Is it fast enough? Do we have the infrastructure to learn and apply our learning? Do we evolve? Do we have the infrastructure to evolve? And lastly, how optimised are our processes, 0 to 10, with actually 0 being maximum optimisation? Because that one I'm going to turn around. The more optimised we are, the more I'd be worried in an organisation. So just something to think about as a start point, all right? Now, very simple. Now, chapter 2 deals with government strategy and risk, and these are my notes, don't worry about what's on them, but I want to pick out a few things, okay? Number one, which I think is a big change, if you want to make an organisation anti-fragile, stress it. Is it obvious? You see, we talk about stress testing in financial institutions, but what you don't want to do is protect your organisation from stress, I suggest. Because by so doing it, you're going to leave it weak. Does that make sense? So what we should be doing when we're looking at our organisations is deliberately trying to just generate a profile of stresses like it might meet in the future. Just as when we're dealing with emergency management and emergency planning, we try and generate the scenarios which are associated with something that might be a realistic sort of area, or at least gives a span of possibilities. We should be doing the same thing with our organisations in terms of everything. Okay? Now, it's quite interesting thinking about the asbestos argument we had before. And you say, I was wondering, thinking back, it's actually the vulnerability of the organisation to the asbestos claims which is so significant. And even if we didn't think there was any problem with asbestos, could we have done a scenario there and said, what happens if we have a problem with asbestos claims? I think we could have created that. And with a view that we should be deliberately challenging everything in the organisation and questioning it and putting it through a scenario test, seems to me that would be very reasonable.